Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you on behalf of the Commission for your assistance today and previously. It's greatly appreciated. I was taken back because during the hearings after the 93 attack, a gentleman named Guy Tozzoli, excuse me, Mr. Tozzoli. He was a former director, I believe, of the World Trade Center, and he testified and suggested after the 93 bombing that the Port Authority and the city emergency systems might train for a scenario of an airplane slamming into one of the towers. And he referred to and made reference to the Port Authority's assertion that the World Trade Center was constructed to take a direct hit from a Boeing 707. And apparently there was some computer simulation that was performed at the time of a fully loaded 707, and it modeled that what the impact would be if it hit, I believe, around the 50th floor. But in any event, that was mentioned. It was the only time it was mentioned during those 3 days of hearings, but it was in fact mentioned. And sadly, we know that the 707 or 767 are virtually the same weight. There's very little difference in fuel, and we know that the World Trade Center can't survive a hit of a fully loaded 707 today. But does that fact that it was explicitly raised and suggested by somebody from the Port Authority in a public hearing suggest that there should have been, or that there actually was, in addition to an awareness of this threat, some response? I mean, some plan. Now, Mr. Reiss, I know in your testimony, your prepared testimony, you talked about having a full-scale evacuation plans and that sort of thing. But what was done, if anything, in response to this warning, if you will?
I would say that the only drills that we did were for a multi-floor type fire. We did not get involved in understanding the potential structural implications or fire implications of that event. I was still in high school when the World Trade Center was built. I had heard and read, as everyone else had, that the Trade Center was designed to withstand the impact of a 707. As we know today, the building took the initial impact because of its tremendous strength for the wind load. What was never factored in was the damage and the resulting heat from all the fire.
But even in such a plan, though, that you had for full-scale evacuation to, I guess, probe, and I don't mean to ask for an additional answer if there is none, but was there no plan for anything if this happened above the actual site of the incident?
Well, there's two parts to that. One is, you asked about the full-scale evacuation. Yes, we had an emergency plan that detailed a full-scale evacuation that was utilized when we had, for example, the South Street Seaport fire that blacked out the entire lower Manhattan area, and we successfully evacuated the building. As far as what do you do with the people above the incident, basically our plan was in conformance with the New York City Defend in Place guidelines that you tell the people to stay where they are until the rescuers were able to reach them. It was not within, I guess you call it the black swan theory, that all three fire stairs would be compromised and that we would not ever be able to reach the people above the fire incident.
Well, thank you. Let me switch subjects a bit. You mentioned in your statement, and it's been mentioned perhaps by both of you, that about 6 weeks before 9/11, the World Trade Center was leased and Silverstein Properties took over. So that was a transition period at the time of 9/11. And can both of you describe to me your understanding at that point of how that transition was to work, and did this change the chain of command in any way, or did it change the functions of training, emergency training or instruction? And in essence, did this lead in any way to the confusion that occurred on 9/11?
Police-wise, no, there's no differences at all. It was still Port Authority jurisdiction, and would be patrolled in the same manner by the Port Authority police.
Well, as far as on the civilian side, basically, I had no authority to do anything anymore. I was relegated to closing out with my staff all the old contracts and paying claims and settling up bills. We had a bunch of people, maybe 20 out of 125, that were trying to train a half a dozen Silverstein staff that were hired. Silverstein Properties brought in a fire safety director who was the fire safety director at 7 World Trade Center, that was a retired New York City fire officer with over 2 decades of experience. As we said, they hired John P. O'Neill as their security director rather than mine, and they hired their own mechanical expert and their own operations and elevator expert. I was in the process of placing my staff in other jobs in the Port Authority, so my staff were getting ready to leave and take severance pay. On that day, basically, most of the Silverstein people were upstairs in their offices on the 88th floor next to mine. It was my staff that had been moved out of the 88th floor that was in some vacant space in 2 World Trade Center in the low floors that was able to get down immediately, luckily, and respond over to the fire command desk. So I had 3 people from my elevator group that were not on the Silverstein transition team assisting and supporting the fire department. One of those, the manager of vertical transportation, was asked by the battalion chief to go over to 2 when 2 was hit and assist them over there. The same thing with my operations supervisors. Basically, we were no longer in charge of the building. That's what the net lease was. For an enormous sum of money, Larry Silverstein took over control of the building. I was trying to explain to their staff some of the unique characteristics of a building that's 110 stories tall and how to handle elevators when it sways, how smoke will migrate, how a simple fire on a truck dock could potentially contaminate 30 or 40 floors due to updrafts in the wintertime. But as I said, all my former staff, we had drilled, we had trained, they just responded as they had been previously trained to do. 6 weeks later, none of them would have been there. They would have been assigned to airports or port facilities or somewhere else, and I wouldn't have lost my staff.
Thank you, sir. That was helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.